Ja, die SABS-hoofadministrateur, of die SABS, want dit is 'n Engelse woord, né? Hoofadministrateur Jodi Scholtz skuif nog nie ateljee by ons om ons meer te gesels oor standaarde in Suid-Afrika en hoe die SABS werk. Good morning, Jodi.
Good morning, Pierre. Good morning, Jennifer.
Good morning.
It's lovely having you. Tell us, let's start right at the bottom for the easy folk out there like me. SABS and standards. How important is it really? Let's be honest about it. I mean, I can probably make something that's not really up to standard, and I can sell it, and I'll make some money. You know, why is it important to standardize?
Sure, you can certainly make something and sell it. The whole point about standards is that it introduces a level of conformity into your product and your manufacturing process. So you would manufacture, let's say, a laptop. And you could do that very easily. These parts are very basic. But for it to be long-lasting, for it to have credibility in the market, for you to be competitive in your industry, it needs to be manufactured according to a specific standard. And so at the Bureau of Standards, that's what we do. We're the only national body that is enacted or mandated by legislation, by the Standards Act, to actually develop national standards. And we do that through a lengthy process in terms of getting experts from a range of sectors to develop a national standard.
You mentioned this national standards. Can you just explain slightly further how exactly those national standards are formulated? Is it just by getting experts in certain fields?
So let me first talk about the composition of what we call our technical committees. So these comprise of NGOs, SMMEs. The biggest portion are industry associations at about 14% representation, and then individual companies or organizations at about 60-65% representation. They do this on a voluntary basis. So we pull them into a room. SABS, the Bureau of Standards, provides the secretariat services for that. And what we then do is we go through a process. So, for instance, you would then have a request for a standard. We then assess market relevance. Once we make a call that this is something that the South African market could benefit from, we then form a technical committee. There's a formal approval process. After that, it goes into a draft is formed. That is then approved by the Standards Approval Committee. Then the real work of this technical committee actually begins, where they start debating things like what is the composition of the chemicals that need to go into that standard? What are the testing methods? So, for instance, if you think about a product like hand sanitizer,
yes.
You know, 2 years ago it was a big story with the advent of COVID. What should go into it? Oh. Should it be alcohol-based hand rubs? What? So the committee then looks at this, and they then, based on their production processes, based on their experience, you've also got academics in the room who then say, no, this is the latest research that's coming out. This is what a national standard could be. Once we have that, it's then published in the Government Gazette. There's a public inquiry process, so anybody can actually then give their inputs to say, actually, we agree or we disagree. Once we get all of those comments, we then edit and get approval, and that then becomes a national standard. That national standard is then used by manufacturers.
That sounds like quite a lengthy process.
A huge process,
What is the turnaround time? Is there a standard turnaround time where you give yourself like 5 months, or does it depend on the product?
Depends on the product, because, you know, some sectors are a lot more complex than others. And so our standard turnaround times, we've been able to reduce those. It's about 301 days. So we're well within the international norms when it comes to that.
My goodness. So SABS is basically, and people don't understand this, is in an administrative position. Am I correct in saying
Absolutely.
that? So you're not manufacturing anything. It's the control and the coordination of standards in South Africa, and that is administrative.
Absolutely. So we do that according to international best practice. The International Standards Organization, of which South Africa, through the Bureau of Standards, is a member. There we have about 260-odd experts representing a wide range of fields, anything from energy efficiency to clothing, leather, footwear, textiles, to green hydrogen, the storage, transportation. So we've got experts representing South African industries in this international body. And so our technical committees as well, we can either adopt an international standard from the International Standards Organization, And then we bring it into our technical committee and we call it, we sansify it. We give it a liquor South African flavour. You know, based on our industry, based on our economic context, our socio-economic situation, we then come up with a national standard. So yes, it is an administrative process, but we do this. We've got a norm that anybody can hold us accountable to. So if you feel we've stepped out of the parameters, you do that. And yeah, I've recently had to preside over a matter where some sectors have felt that the process wasn't inclusive enough, and so it then goes through a formal process of review.
Lots of hoo-ha and administration things that we need to. But we want to talk about nice things. We want to talk about a couple of examples that you can give us of really standardizing successes that you've had in the last couple of years. But before we get there, we're just going to take a quick break and we'll come back and we'll talk about that. Nou ja, Jodi Scholtz, wys jou nee, SABS. Baie meer ingewikkeld as wat jy gedink het. Welkom terug. Ons gesels met die SABS-hoofadministrateur Jodi Scholtz oor Scholtz or Scholtz. What's
Scholtz.
Scholtz, you see. It's either Scholtz or Scholtz, but this one is Scholtz. about standards in general in South Africa and the South African Bureau of Standards and the South African national standards. You referred to hand sanitizer earlier, that there was a big issue in hand sanitizer, the composition of hand sanitizer. What does it comprise of? And that's one of the things that you had to look at.
Absolutely. So I'd get SMSs of pictures of people's hands blistering because, as you said, you know, you can manufacture something in your garage.
Yes.
And so people were using all kinds of alcohols to manufacture hand sanitizer and selling this on the market. So the Bureau of Standards, we're not a regulator, and we also are in the business of voluntary standards. So it's not a compulsory standard. But so what we did is we partnered with the National Consumer Commission. They have the powers to go out and seize, to get a product off the shelf, seize and test it. And so we then, as a partnership, we work with the NCC, as we call it. They went out, I think it was in Durban, looked at this, and they were able to close the manufacturer down because they weren't producing sanitizers according to the standard, and it had adverse impacts. Now, the standard for hand sanitizers is a voluntary standard. It's not a compulsory standard.
Yeah, I was wondering now, there are standards that are voluntary and standards that are mandatory. What's the difference between the two, and why is there, I mean, why can't everything be voluntary?
Look, so a lot of standards, well, all of the standards we develop are voluntary, right? And so some regulators can take these standards, publish it as part of the Gazette, and it then becomes part of their regulations. So if you are in that industry, you would then, so for instance, disinfectants, that's a regulated product. It's regulated by the NRCS, National Regulator for Compulsory Specifications. So they would go out, test. You have to get a mark, they call it an LOA from the NRCS in order to produce, and you then can get the mark. And we test for that, so you then get a SABS mark that says you're now producing according to the standard and it's fit for purpose. So, you know, standards on their own, it sells trust, it sells assurance to both not only to the manufacturer, but also more importantly to the consumer who's using that product.
But there are products that has to be standardized.
Yes, and those are the compulsory standards. Those are the regulations. So, for instance, in the health space, the tablets you take, you know, you were talking about Zinplex, SAPRA would regulate those. And so you have to produce it according to those regulations.
So I think just from like a practical point of view, if I walk into my nearest retailer, how many of those products, do all of them have to be standardized, go through that, or will I actually find quite a few products on like the racks there that haven't been approved by SABS?
You would find quite a lot of products. You know, you sound like my 9-year-old son. He's taken this as a mission to check. Mom.
Yes.
So he goes into a large retailer and he says, Mom, none of these products have the SABS mark on it. I don't think we should shop here.
Lovely.
You know, so yes. So where products have a public health and public safety impact, those are regulated by a range of regulators in the country. They can look to SABS to say, listen, come and develop the standard for us. So going back to the hand sanitizer example, we then realized that there are different compositions of ethanol and alcohol. And so we amended the standard. We also amended the test methods. So for instance, you had to rub it on your hands twice within a 20-minute interval. We then changed it, rub it on your hands in a particular way 3 times and certain intervals, because we then wanted to test whether that had any adverse impacts.
So standardizing of product and process.
Absolutely.
But now internationally, obviously, South Africa doesn't stand alone. We're not an island in the world. We are part of the international community and part of the continent. What's the impact that South African Bureau of Standards has in the continent and internationally?
So we belong to the International Standards Organization, ISO. We have about 260 odd experts participating in their technical committees, because we feel it's absolutely important for us to not only have a voice locally, but also to have a global presence, because our manufacturers, many of our manufacturers export globally. And so that's how we change the dial. We also serve in leadership positions. So, one of the SABS colleagues, he serves on the ISO Policy Council, on the council, determining policy for standards globally. So, we really do play a very key role. On the continent, what we've done recently, and I think it was at the end of April, we've signed on to the African Standardization Organization. They have something called they're called mutual recognition agreements. It's recognizing the SABS mark in Rwanda, in Ghana, in Kenya. And so obviously our processes have to be aligned. So there's a lot of work. So we're busy with the national consultation to get views from across the economy by the end of May, to say, we're wanting to do this. What do you think? What are some of the loopholes? What are some of the things we need to watch out for? And so we'll put that position forward in ARSO. So, it's intended that if you're an exporter, you're wanting to export to Rwanda, you've got a SABS mark, it then saves you money, because you don't have to go and pay for compliance tests, all of their processes, because we recognize each other's marks.
It's a success story.
Absolutely. I mean, it says something about the quality of SABS and what they're doing, because like you say, it saves money for people, and also it's really nice to know that you also get recognition in another country, because I can't imagine that that's a very easy process to make sure that standardization is exactly the same. So absolutely, success story.
Yeah. So just on that, for instance, we've got bilateral relations with Namibia and Botswana. So they recognize our mark. We've got a large manufacturing base that exports into Namibia and Botswana, and they then recognize our mark. We then have these bilateral meetings to assess that, has there anything changed in the process. We do their number plates for them. And so, so there's a lot of cooperation that happens not only within the domestic economy, but also within the continent and internationally.
That's good news. Thank you very much, Jodi, for sharing it with us. Ja, daar het jy dit. Hoofadministrateur Jodi Scholtz van SABS of SABS, want dit is 'n Engelse brand, wat vanmôre met ons gesels het oor standaarde. En wys jou, die standaard wat jou ma gestel het, is soms die regte ene, maar hierdie is 'n ander een.